Picture this. An 80,000-ton steel colossus cuts through the waters of the East China Sea. Its deck bristles with fifth-generation stealth fighters. Its electromagnetic catapults, the most advanced ever installed on a conventionally powered warship, can hurl fully loaded aircraft into the sky faster than any system China has ever fielded before. On November 5, 2025, Chinese President Xi Jinping stood at the Yulin Naval Base and watched as the CS Fujian was formally commissioned into the People's Liberation Army Navy. The ceremony wasn't just a military milestone. It was a direct message aimed at Tokyo, at Taipei, and at Washington that China's ambitions in the Pacific are no longer theoretical. But here's the part Beijing doesn't want you to focus on. Japan was watching too, and Japan had already started building its answer. If you've been following the shift happening right now in the Pacific, one of the most consequential military buildups in decades, make sure you're subscribed to World Brief Daily and hit the notification bell because what we're about to lay out goes far deeper than headlines. We're talking about an entirely new chapter in Pacific geopolitics playing out right now in real time. Let's start at the beginning because to understand what Japan is doing today, you have to understand what China built and what China believes that warship can accomplish. The Fujian is no ordinary vessel. With a full load displacement exceeding 80,000 tons, it is the largest warship China has ever constructed. But its size is not the most important thing. What makes the Fujian a genuine leap forward is the technology buried in its structure. For the first time in Chinese naval history, and only the second time in the entire world, a carrier has been fitted with an electromagnetic catapult system. The first was the USS Gerald R. Ford. The Fujian is the second. That is not a coincidence. Chinese engineers studied the Ford-class program for years before committing to the same approach. Why does this matter so much? Because a catapult system is the difference between a floating airstrip and a force multiplier. With its 3 electromagnetic launch rails, the Fujian can sort heavier aircraft with greater payloads more frequently and with less mechanical stress on the airframes. According to defense analysts cited by USNI News, this unlocks the deployment of the J-35 fifth-generation stealth fighter, the KJ-600 fixed-wing early warning aircraft, and the J-15D electronic warfare variant, a complete balanced air wing that China's older carriers simply could not support. The Fujian also carries up to 70 aircraft. At the commissioning ceremony, Chinese state television showed J-35 stealth jets, KJ-600 command aircraft, and Z-20 helicopters lined up across its flight deck. This was a deliberate display. Beijing wanted the world to see exactly what it had built. And according to a Pentagon assessment released in December 2025, cited by USNI News, China is not stopping here. The Pentagon report states that the plan aims to field 9 aircraft carriers by 2035. 9. That would triple China's current force and represent, in the report's own words, the largest carrier buildup in the Indo-Pacific since World War II. But let us be precise about what the Fujian's mission is actually expected to be because it is not what most people assume. Chinese strategists are not planning to use the Fujian to bomb Taiwan's coastlines. That is not the role it has been designed for. According to multiple strategic assessments and the structure of China's operational planning, the Fujian's primary function in a Taiwan scenario would be to position itself east of the island. By deploying into the waters between Taiwan and Japan's southern islands, the East China Sea near the Skakus near Okinawa, the Fujian would serve as a steel barrier, a wall of sea-based air power designed to intercept any military reinforcement coming from Japan or from American bases on the Japanese mainland. In other words, it is not a weapon for attacking Taiwan. It is a weapon for attacking the alliance that would defend Taiwan. Japan understands this completely, and Japan's response has been extraordinary. Let's step back and appreciate what is actually happening in Tokyo right now. Japan's current defense posture represents the most aggressive military expansion the country has undertaken since the end of World War II. Its record defense budget for 2025 exceeded $55 billion. There's a figure that would have been unthinkable just 5 years ago. And that budget is not being spent on maintaining the status quo. It is being spent on fundamentally changing what Japan can do in a conflict. The threat is existential from Tokyo's perspective. 90% of Japan's oil, natural gas, and maritime trade must pass through the straits surrounding Taiwan to reach the home islands. If China establishes dominance over those waters, if the Fujian and its strike group can sit off Japan's southwestern coast unchallenged, Japan's connection to global supply chains would effectively be at Beijing's discretion. Japan's Okinawa Island would sit less than 300 kilometers from Chinese military forces. That is not a strategic discomfort, that is a strategic stranglehold. So Tokyo has moved decisively and across multiple domains simultaneously. Let us walk through exactly what Japan has built. We begin in the domain nobody talks about enough. Electronic warfare. Japan's domestically produced Kawasaki EC-2 electronic warfare aircraft has entered service. This aircraft carries no bombs. It carries no missiles. Its arsenal is electromagnetic. Its mission is to fly beyond the reach of China's lethal air defense systems, and from that standpoint distance blind enemy radars, sever communication networks, deceive missile guidance systems, and flood the electromagnetic spectrum with interference so dense that China's most advanced fighters, the J-20 stealth jets, would see nothing on their screens but noise. This is a force multiplier of extraordinary value, but it has an obvious vulnerability. The EC-2 is a large aircraft. It is slow relative to fighters, and China has spent years producing swarms of cheap AI-enabled kamikaze drones. Exactly the kind of saturation threat that a lone electronic warfare aircraft cannot survive without an escort. Japan knows this, which is why the EC-2 is just one piece of a much larger puzzle. The second piece is Japan's transformation of its so-called helicopter carriers. When Japan launched the Isumo and Kaga ships, it insisted they were destroyer-class vessels designed purely to operate helicopters. Nobody outside Japan's defense ministry entirely believed that, and now the conversion is complete. Both ships have received reinforced flight decks and heat-resistant coatings. They are becoming fully operational aircraft carriers purpose-built for F-35B short takeoff and vertical landing operations. Here is why this changes the math in a Taiwan contingency. China's missile arsenal, ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, hypersonic glide vehicles, is specifically calibrated to destroy Japan's fixed air bases in the opening minutes of any conflict. The runways at Okinawa, at Misawa, at Kadena, these are fixed targets that Chinese planners have had programmed for years. But an Isumo-class ship carrying a wing of F-35Bs is a moving target. It is a mobile airbase that can reposition, that can disperse, that cannot be destroyed in a first strike. The same way a runway can. A fleet of F-35Bs launching from sea, exploiting their stealth capability to penetrate China's air defense networks, can provide close escort for the EC-2 electronic warfare aircraft and establish an air superiority umbrella over the Taiwan Strait. This is a headache of the first order for Chinese military planners. And it gets worse for Beijing from here because Japan has now entered a realm that until very recently was considered the exclusive territory of science fiction. In September 2025, Japan's Acquisition Technology and Logistics Agency, known as ATLA, released footage and images confirming something remarkable. The ship-mounted electromagnetic railgun deployed aboard the test vessel JS Asuka had successfully fired at a real target ship at sea. As ATLA announced on its official channels, these tests conducted between June and early July 2025 marked the first time a ship-mounted railgun had ever struck a real vessel target. A world first, not a test range, not a laboratory, an actual warship at sea, firing at a moving target and hitting it. Let's talk about what this weapon actually does, because the physics are staggering. The Oscar's railgun fires a 320 green steel dart. It does not use gunpowder. It uses electromagnetic force to accelerate the projectile along a 6-meter barrel to a muzzle velocity exceeding 2,000 meters per second. In earlier land tests, ATLA recorded velocities approaching 10,500 meters SS, close to Mach 7. As Naval News reported in its coverage of the trials, the projectiles reached their target at speeds that no existing air defense system in the world is currently designed to intercept. A kinetic projectile traveling at Mach 6 or Mach 7 has a flight time measured in seconds over tactical ranges. There is no reaction window, there is no intercept solution, but the engineering achievement that matters most is durability. previous railgun programs, including the United States Navy's decade-long effort, which was eventually canceled after consuming nearly $500 million, failed because repeated firing destroyed the barrel. The electromagnetic forces involved are so violent that conventional barrel materials eroded rapidly. Japan solved this. ATLA achieved a documented 120-round continuous firing test without significant barrel degradation, a breakthrough that the U.S. program never replicated. And Japan did it for approximately 1 billion yen, roughly $6.5 million. The U.S. spent $500 million. And Japan, at a fraction of the cost, crossed the finish line first. The cost per shot is a fraction of a percent of a standard missile. We are talking about a weapon that can fire hundreds of hypervelocity rounds for less than the cost of a single conventional interceptor missile. In an era when the U.S. Navy burned through hundreds of multi-million-dollar missiles, shooting down cheap, healthy drones in the Red Sea, this matters enormously. Japan is developing the answer to the cost asymmetry problem that is bankrupting modern missile defense. And as Army Recognition reported in December 2025, Japan has now gone further. A 100-kilowatt high-energy laser weapon system has been installed aboard the JS Asuka. The system, developed by ATLA over a 7-year research program, completed ground-based tests, confirming its key performance thresholds. Full-scale sea trials were projected to begin after February 2026. The laser is designed for a specific and urgent mission, neutralizing swarms of cheap drones and incoming mortar rounds. The cost per engagement is, for all practical purposes, zero. As long as the ship's generators are running, the laser has ammunition. A swarm of 100 kamikaze drones that might cost $1 million to intercept with conventional missiles can be destroyed by a directed energy beam that costs almost nothing, railguns, and high-energy lasers. Japan is building an impenetrable dome over its fleet, one that doesn't run out of interceptors because it doesn't use interceptors. It uses electricity and physics. Now, we want to take a moment here on World Brief Daily to thank the sponsors who make this kind of in-depth analysis possible. Without your support, this channel couldn't bring you the detailed sourced reporting that you've come to expect. Now, back to the Pacific Theater, because we haven't even gotten to the missiles yet. Japan's Type 12 anti-ship missile, recently deployed in upgraded form to the Kumamoto base, has a range of 1,000 kilometers. Read that again, 1,000 kilometers. That is not a coastal defense weapon. That is a strike weapon. It can reach Chinese military ports. It can reach the Chinese coastline. It can reach Shanghai. Through its deployment, Japan is operationalizing a doctrine that is new to its post-war history. If you threaten Japan, Japan does not simply wait to absorb the blow. Japan can threaten you back from the home islands before you ever reach Japanese waters. This is the doctrine the Japanese call standoff defense, the ability to strike the source of a threat rather than intercept its weapons in flight. Japan's record defense budget earmarked approximately $6 billion specifically for standoff systems, including long-range missiles and a supporting satellite network. This is not incremental modernization. This is a strategic transformation. But Japan is not only hardening its offensive capability, it is also transforming its geography into a fortress. On Yonaguni Island, the westernmost point of Japanese territory and sitting just 110 kilometers from Taiwan, runways are being extended and deepened. New shelters are being built for fighter jets. Radar stations and long-range listening facilities are going in. Yonaguni and other islands in the Ryukyu chain are being converted into what analysts are calling unsinkable aircraft carriers, fixed platforms bristling with sensors, missiles, and communications infrastructure stretching from Japan's home islands all the way to the edge of the Taiwan Strait. And then there is Russia. Because no analysis of Japan's strategic situation is complete without acknowledging that Tokyo is not dealing with one adversary. It is dealing with two that are coordinating. Russia's Pacific Fleet has not been idle. As tensions over Taiwan have intensified, Russian submarines have been conducting anti-surface exercises near the Kuril Islands, directly north of Japan's Hokkaido. Russian warships have moved through Japan's exclusive economic zone, a direct signal of intent, and Russia's MiG-31 fighters armed with Kinjal hypersonic missiles, with a claimed range of up to 2,000 kilometers, are conducting regular patrols over the Sea of Japan. The Kinjal, which Russia has claimed travels at speeds exceeding Mach 10, has been portrayed by Moscow as an interceptor-proof weapon. Whether that claim survives rigorous scrutiny is debatable, but its deployment in patrol patterns targeting Japan is not ambiguous. China and Russia together are applying pressure from both ends. The Fujian blocks reinforcements from the south. Russia menaces from the north. And in between, Japan sits on an island chain that is both strategically vital and inherently exposed. This is why the United States has been so deliberate in its counter-positioning. The USS Mustin, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, has been deployed to Yokosuka Naval Base, the most critical American military hub in Japan. The Mustin is not just another warship. It is one of the most sophisticated surface combatants ever built. Over 90 vertical launch cells embedded in its deck are loaded with SM-6 missiles, capable of engaging targets at the edge of space, and Tomahawk cruise missiles capable of striking land targets hundreds of kilometers away. But its most important feature is the Aegis combat system. The Aegis radar suite can calculate the trajectory of Chinese ballistic missiles, the so-called carrier-killer DF-21D and DF-26 within seconds of their launch, and intercept missiles against them before they reach their targets. China calls the DF series missiles its trump card against American aircraft carriers. The Mustin sitting at Yokosuka is positioned to neutralize that trump card before it can be played. The Japan-U.S. military integration now goes far beyond shared basing. It extends into space. And here is where the most recent development takes on its full significance. As reported by the Japan Times in March 2026, Japan's Prime Minister Sai Takaichi is preparing to formally announce Japan's participation in the United States Golden Dome program during her summit with President Trump in Washington. Japan's involvement would include integrating its advanced SPY-7 radar network, one of the most capable long-range early warning systems on Earth, into the Golden Dome's detection architecture alongside Japan's fleet of Aegis-equipped destroyers. Japan plans to launch its first dedicated space domain awareness satellite in fiscal year 2026, and the U.S. Space Force has publicly called Japan one of its closest allies in the program. The Golden Dome, announced by President Trump in May 2025, with an initial price tag of $175 billion, is conceived as a continental-scale successor to Israel's Iron Dome, a layered system of space-based sensors, kinetic interceptors, and ground-based radars designed to detect and destroy hypersonic missiles outside the atmosphere before they can reach their targets. If it works, and that is a significant if, with the Congressional Budget Office projecting potential costs approaching $831 billion over 20 years, it would represent a fundamental transformation of deterrence. A missile detected by satellites in orbit could be engaged and destroyed within seconds before it completes its descent. For Japan, participation in Golden Dome is not charity toward an ally. It is strategic insurance. Japan is geographically closer to China, Russia, and North Korea, all nuclear-armed states with expanding missile arsenals than any other major U.S. ally. Japan's involvement means Japan's sensors contribute to the system's threat picture, and Japan's territory falls inside its protective umbrella. Beijing has watched all of this with visible alarm. The Global Times, which functions as an official mouthpiece for the Chinese Communist Party, has published repeated accusations that Japan is returning to its pre-war militarism. Chinese state media characterizes the Asumo-class carrier conversions, the railgun program, the Type 12 missile deployments, and the Golden Dome discussions as proof that Tokyo has launched a new arms race in Asia. Beijing has issued formal diplomatic protests to Tokyo over the fortification of the Ryukyu Island chain. But from Tokyo's perspective, the calculation is straightforward. In just one day in early 2025, Japanese defense tracking counted 36 Chinese military aircraft and 9 warships conducting exercises in a ring around Taiwan, operations designed to simulate a blockade. China violated Japan's airspace off Nagasaki with a reconnaissance aircraft. Chinese survey ships have entered Japanese territorial waters off Kagoshima. In June 2025, for the first time ever, 2 Chinese aircraft carriers, the Liaoning and the Shandong, operated together east of the second island chain in waters approaching Guam. A Chinese J-15 fighter jet launched from the Shandong chased a Japanese P-3C reconnaissance aircraft and closed to within 45 meters, less than the length of a bus, in what Japan's defense ministry described as an abnormally close approach. These are not the actions of a neighbor expressing displeasure. These are the actions of a power testing the boundaries of what it can get away with before Japan responds. And Japan has now responded. What we are watching in the Pacific in 2026 is not an arms race in the traditional sense. Two nations building competing stockpiles of the same weapons. What we are watching is a fundamental transformation of how Japan intends to defend itself and its interests, using technologies and doctrines that break with everything Japan has done militarily since 1945. A nation that once refused to acknowledge it had aircraft carriers now operates two and is converting both into fully capable flat tops for the most advanced fighter jet in the world. A nation that once considered offensive missiles politically untouchable now deploys 1,000-kilometer anti-H-ship weapons on its home islands. A nation that once deferred entirely to American deterrence is now co-developing the next generation of missile defense architecture, contributing its own radars, its own satellites, and its own technology to a system that could make China's nuclear deterrent less credible. And at sea, aboard a 6,200-ton test ship barely noticed by the world's press, Japan's engineers have done what the United States, with all its resources and technological depth, could not. They have made a shipboard railgun work. They have fired it at a real target. They have proven it can be manufactured for a fraction of the cost of the missiles it is designed to replace. Let's be precise about what all this means strategically. China's bet on the Taiwan blockade rests on a specific set of assumptions: that Japan cannot project air power into the Taiwan Strait without fixed bases that can be destroyed in an opening strike, that America's carrier strike groups can be held at bay by ballistic missile salvos, that hypersonic weapons flying at Mach 10 cannot be intercepted in time, and that the cost asymmetry of drone warfare will exhaust Western defense budgets faster than China's manufacturing base can produce new drones. Japan is attacking every single one of those assumptions simultaneously. Mobile F-35B carriers counter the fixed base vulnerability. The USS Mustin and Japan's Aegis fleet counter the carrier killer missiles. The Golden Dome program attacks the hypersonic threat, and the railgun and laser programs attack the drone cost equation at its root. Defense analyst Brian Hart of the Center for Strategic and International Studies, quoted by the Japan Times in November 2025, described the commissioning of the HeyGen as both a quantitative and qualitative improvement for China. But the same logic applies equally to what Japan is building. Japan's military transformation represents both a quantitative increase, more ships, more missiles, more aircraft, and a qualitative one. New principles, new doctrines, new technologies that China has not yet answered. That does not mean conflict is inevitable. It does not mean Japan and China are on a countdown to war. The waters of the Pacific are cold and deep, and wars fought across them are catastrophic beyond easy imagination. Both sides understand this. But deterrence only works if the adversary believes the cost of aggression exceeds the potential gain. What Japan is doing that with American backing, with railguns and lasers and carrier conversions and satellite networks and 1,000-kilometer missiles, is making the cost calculation unmistakably clear. Because here is the bottom line: a single spark, a radar that misreads an approaching aircraft, a radio message that gets lost in electromagnetic noise, a commander in the South China Sea who decides today is the day to test how serious Tokyo really is. Any of these could be the moment everything changes. And in that moment, the question of whether Japan built enough, quickly enough, and wisely enough becomes a question with consequences for everyone in the Pacific and far beyond. There is one more number to keep in mind as we close today. The Pentagon report from December 2025 says China wants 9 aircraft carriers by 2035. The HeyGen was carrier number 3. 6 more are planned. Japan has approximately a decade to ensure that its railguns are operational, its laser systems are deployed, its mobile carrier groups are battle-ready, and its seat in the Golden Dome architecture is fully secured. The clock is running. The steel is moving. And the Pacific, that immense body of water that determines so much of the global economy, so much of the global chip supply, so much of the global future, is the board on which this game is being played. So tell us what you think. Is Japan doing enough? Can a combination of next-generation directed energy weapons, mobile air power, and the American alliance hold China's ambitions in check? Or is the gap between China's industrial capacity and Japan's strategic responses growing faster than Tokyo can close it? We want your analysis in the comments below. And if this kind of detailed, sourced breakdown of the forces reshaping our world is what you come to World Brief Daily for, make sure you're subscribed and that your notifications are turned on. We're going to keep following this story as it develops because it is far from over. Thanks for watching.